All right, Leviticus chapter 27. So this is the third reference to tithing in the Bible, what I'm going to call chronologically. It's not really chronologically, but sequentially in the Bible. The first one is Abram. We did a long study on that. The second one, it's crazy, is Jacob. Remember that whole story that Kevin Cameron told us last weekend about the stone that he laid on and he set up a pillar to the Lord? Well, that was the second reference in the Bible to tithing. We didn't really highlight that last week, but I thought that was so interesting, that smack dab in the middle of tithing, that we did this altars and doorposts thing, and wow, that was another reference to tithing. So that's the second one. This one in Leviticus chapter 27 is the third one. So could we put that up on the screen here for folks? Leviticus 27, verse 30. So this is a verse that, for me, settles a question of, okay, let's say that I've convinced you that we should be tithing today. Okay, great. Here's a common question. What should I tithe on? What should I tithe on? Maybe I've convinced you that your normal salary, your normal wages that you get from your job, like, okay, yeah, we want to be tithing on that. But what about birthday money? What about retirement money? If you're a person who has investments, what about when those investments grow in value? Do you tithe on the growth in value? So here's a verse that has informed my thinking on all of it, and it's very simple, and I'm going to tell you how I use the simple principle of this to interpret how I think about what I should be tithing on. Okay, verse number 30, it says, "Thus all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord." So my simple Sunday school answer to you is all. Any increase in wealth that we experience, my interpretation is that is something that I want to be tithing on. So when my kids get birthday money, I'm going to be talking to them about how great it is that they get to tithe on their birthday money. When they get an allowance, I'm going to start talking to them about tithing on that allowance. And that was something that my parents did with me. And doing that at such an early age, it was really helpful for me to transition when I was making more than, 25 cents an hour to water the plants. That's when I discovered that I'm interested in business, and I smelled a bad deal right out of the way. Dad, you kidding me? You're gonna pay me 25 cents an hour to water the plants? You kidding me? My purchasing power after like 10 hours is gonna be like nothing. Are you kidding me? I'd rather just play with G.I. Joes and like not get any money at all. Like that's way more worth it to me. And then I had to learn different lessons that had nothing to do with money. Had a lot to do with, you could be doing this for free, son. So do you want 25 cents an hour or 0 cents an hour? Got it. Okay, I was kind of missing the point on that one. Everything, every part of my income that I receive, whether it's my salary, as a part of my job, I also get bonuses, so I tithe on my bonuses. If you have investments, this is the way that I think about investments, is once I turn those investments, like say you own stock or something like that, once you turn those investments into something that you intend to use for purchasing something, purchasing power, in other words, you take stocks and you turn it into cash or you put it into a bank account, that's the moment when I would tithe on it, when you take it out of the investments. And the reason is pretty simple, because those investments will go up and down, and so you don't know if it goes up and then you tithe on when it goes up, and then when it goes down, what do you do then? Or it goes down and then it goes up. So the principle is, I don't want to cheat God, even accidentally, out of something that is His. So similar, like if your company gives you a 401k, what I intend to do is once I retire and I pull the money out of that 401k, that's the moment when I'm going to tithe on those monies. So I don't tithe on it as it's being contributed to the 401k, but it's something that I'm going to do once I take it out, and I intend to use it to purchase whatever I'm going to purchase. So the other question that people have asked me, and that I had to confront myself, is do I tithe on the pre-tax money that I get or the post-tax money that I have? And in the spirit of transparency, I'll say that for a lot of my life, I was tithing on the post-tax or after-tax money that I had. And at the time, before anybody talked to me about it, I felt great about that. Because I'm like, it comes right out of my paycheck. It doesn't even feel like it's mine. You know what I mean? Like I get my paycheck. It already has been deducted the amount that I pay in taxes because my employer would be withholding those taxes for me. And so it didn't feel like it was mine. And so I felt fine about it. But then once a mentor of mine really challenged me on that, I realized that I was going out of order with things. And I was allowing the money that I rightfully owe the government because of the laws of the land, that money, I was allowing that to go first before I tithed. And that is really what was so off to me about that. I can't show you a verse that says, thou shalt tithe on the pre-tax income that you have. I can't show you a verse like that, though we will talk about a verse later where Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is the Lord's. And so when I read this verse that says all, it's like, it doesn't matter if your income comes from the ground, from animals on the ground, from trees on the ground. It doesn't matter where your income comes from. 10% of that belongs to the Lord. And then I started thinking about it really specifically. And if you're kind of a literal person like I am, then I think this might help you. It might help you. So in terms of ownership of wages, when your employer pays you money, like that is your money. And even if a millisecond, a nanosecond after that money has been paid to you, they take it and they sequester it to withhold for taxes, it still was yours even for a very short amount of time. So it is yours. You own it. And you could even tell your employer, I don't want you to withhold my taxes. I'm going to keep track of that myself. And in fact, there's some jobs that have to do that, right? If you're an independent contractor, I mean, you're the guy or you're the gal, and you have to like take that money that you get from a job, and you have to take whatever percentage of it to make sure you have enough to pay for taxes. So it's still yours. You own it. And you do have a choice. I mean, you could not pay taxes. I do not recommend that, because that's against the law, and there would be consequences for that, but you do have a choice in that. And so you receive this income, you receive this resource, and you have a choice immediately, what am I going to do with this? And so I think just the convenience of my employer immediately withholding taxes was kind of like, not tricking me, but it made me feel like that money wasn't even mine. But that's actually not true. That money is mine. And so what I want to do is I want to I want to give tithes on the pre-tax income that I have because it's my statement. Remember like Abram said when the king of Sodom came to him, he's like, let me give you a deal, buddy. And Abram said, I don't want anything from you because I don't want you to be able to say, the king of Sodom saying, I have made Abram rich. Similarly, I don't want anyone else, any other power, be it the government, be it any other loan that I have to pay off, be it just the bills that I have, I don't want any of that stuff to make claim to ownership of me. And if I give tithes first, what I'm saying is, actually the one who owns me is God. So God pre-owns me, so any other thing that I have to pay, a loan that I have to pay off with my mortgage or my car or whatever, any of that stuff, none of those things can make any claim of ownership over me because first, I'm the Lord's. The other thing that I was thinking about that somebody highlighted to me is it's very clear in the scriptures to me as we studied in Malachi that there is a blessing that is associated with tithing. If you missed that teaching on Malachi, I strongly recommend that you go back and look at that because I think it'll change your perspective on what happens when we tithe. The Lord says, you can test me in this, and I'm going to open up the heavenly storehouses and pour into you so much that you're going to be overflowing. I'm going to rebuke the devourer, and you're going to be overflowing with blessing. So there is a blessing that is associated with tithing. And I don't want to, and this isn't tongue-in-cheek, I'm not trying to make a political statement, but some of the people that I've met that really, they want to dig their heels and say, no, I don't want to tithe on my pre-tax, the government and taxes, and it's way too much that they call for us, and it's just what are they doing with that money? It's so inefficient, and they just want to talk about how bad the government does with our money. And for me, that's even more of an argument to tithe on the pre-tax money, because the 90% that you have left over is blessed. And so if your argument is the government's super inefficient, then you're saying they need the most help they could possibly get. Don't you think that God would be the best helper ever? So again, I'm not trying to be tongue-in-cheek here, but you know what I like to imagine? I like to imagine my tax dollars that have been blessed of the Lord because I've tithed on the pre-tax. I like imagining that those tax dollars could somehow, some way, be redeemed by the Lord, even within the institution of man, to somehow bless someone and further his kingdom. That's how much I believe in the redemptive power of God and the power of my obedience to his word. So when God says anything that you do that increases your wealth whatsoever, figure out how to tithe on it. Figure out how to tithe on it. And that's my challenge to you. Figure out how to tithe on it. Like I said before, for most of my tithing lifetime, I had been tithing on my after-tax income. And I was married at the time with kids when Lindsay and I got challenged this way. And it wasn't an easy thing okay, yeah, no worries. I'll just take an extra, this money, all this money that I have laying around, didn't even know what to do with it. That's cool. I'll give that to you. It wasn't like that at all. We had to go back and change our budget in order to accommodate that. And I really want to acknowledge and be sensitive to the fact that many of you might be in a position where you're considering tithing, or you're considering tithing on your pre-tax, and you're thinking to yourself, I'm literally going to have to change my budget. And that might mean that I'm going to be really tight in some areas that's going to be uncomfortable. And the reason why I wanted to do this kind of miscellaneous, let's tackle the hard questions here together all in one go at the end of this teaching series is because I think you're making a mistake if you forget how this whole thing started. That Abram, this sinning, lost man, experienced the grace and the forgiveness and overflowing blessing of God, and he tithed without God ever telling him he should do it. That's where it started. And then we see in Malachi how God's I'm going to get your attention on deeper issues by asking you to tithe. And those deeper issues include control. Those deeper issues include faith in God. Those deeper issues include trusting him that he really is going to do what he says he's going to do. And so when I'm talking about tithing, it's really it's grabbing your heart in a certain way. What I want to suggest to you is that it's not just about the dollars and cents, but that God might be wanting to talk to you about something that's deeper than the greenback. It's deeper than the money. And that's the thing that I would really encourage you to pay attention to. And by the way, I just want to say, if anything that I say tweaks you out, you're just oh my gosh, that feels so harsh or unloving, or you don't understand my situation, can I just give you an out, okay? That out is go talk to a spiritual leader in your life. Go talk to your small group leader. Find a pastor and say, I feel like I'm in a weird, unique situation, and these general principles that Evan was talking about with tithing just feels like I'm not sure how I can do that. Talk to somebody about what's really going on in your life. Don't just let it be some big old legalistic wave that crashes down on you and you're left just sprawled out on the beach, just destroyed by it. That's not the intent of this at all. All right. Okay, let's go to, well, actually, don't flip there, but show Deuteronomy 14:28 up on the screen here. So Deuteronomy 14:28 is something that we're going to read first, and then we're going to go to Numbers. If you want to flip to Numbers 18, you can do so now. But let me read Deuteronomy 14:28 to you. Now I want to answer the question, okay, to whom should I tithe? Maybe I've convinced you, yeah, all of the income that I get, all of the wealth increase that I get, I want to tithe on that. Who should I give that tithe to? Who should I give it to? There's a lot of places where I could give money that seems like they'd be progressing some sort of good cause out there. Who should I give it to? Deuteronomy 14:28. At the end of every third year, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year and shall deposit it in your town. Okay, so let's do a little history lesson. Israel came out of Egypt. They had one tabernacle. In that one tabernacle, they would collect all of the resources that would be tithes and offerings in that one central location. But when they got to Canaan and they spread out to be the nation of Israel, and all the tribes were given a different inheritance here and there, it was really difficult for them to take like a lamb and go from Dan to Jerusalem. So God said, okay, listen, I want you to take the tithe that you have, and I want you to put it into the local center, the local place where the Levites were, the priests were, who are serving your town. I want you to give your tithe to that central location. And, in this day and age, okay, so they had to tithe like literally, they took the bushel of like wheat and they brought it to the priests. They brought their lamb and they brought it to the priests. In this day and age, with all of these like pay by text message stuff, you could literally send money from here to some other country halfway around the world, bang, in an instant. So we don't have that inconvenience of how do you take that resource and put it in a place where it's needed. We don't have that inconvenience. But I really don't think that this is just a statement of convenience, because you can't carry a lamb a really long distance, and so I'll just make it easy for you, and so just give it to your local place. There's something that's much deeper here, and that's actually in the next verse that I'll read to you. It says, the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the alien and the orphan and the widow who are in your town, shall come and eat and be satisfied, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. So very simply, if somebody were to ask me, where do I put my tithe? My tithe. I would say, very simply, in your local church, where the priests, the pastors, the ministers, where they are serving you, that's where you put your tithe. Now, I know some of you, I was just talking to somebody before service about charitable giving. I am not saying don't give to charitable contributions. You know what verse is not in the Bible? Thou shalt only give 10% of your income away to things. It doesn't say that. There's no limit to the generosity that God might be encouraging you to give. But my interpretation, just from a holistic Bible study of where your tithe ought to be going, is to the local church that is serving your needs. That's why when we do our tithes and offerings here at the church, we say, if you're a guest with us, seriously, don't worry about it. We're not looking to get money from you. We're not looking to do anything. Like, we just want you to come and be welcome. Until we have proven to you that the way that we are doing things, the people that we have available are serving your spiritual needs, I don't want you to be tithing here. And so we'll use a phrase like, go to your home church and tithe there. Tithe there. Now, if there's some other church in the county and you're like, they're doing rockin' stuff, but they're not your home church, they're not the place where you're receiving that care, where those priests and Levites are contributing towards you, then I would say, great, you want to financially contribute to them? Fantastic. That's not your tithe, though. That's what the Bible calls offerings. That's above and beyond your tithe. And I just, I've met so many people who do this like tricky little dance, like, okay, all right, no, that's cool, yeah. I'm going to give 8% to my home church, and then 2%, because 8 plus 2 adds up to tithe. I'm going to give 2% to another church or charitable organization, and that's how I'll settle that problem. And I just got to say, I don't think that's what the Bible says. That 10% belongs to the Lord. And here's the principle. And we talked about this previously in our Bible studies, but the principle is that when you tithe that 10%, you're saying, I make no claim whatsoever to these monies in any way, shape, or form. So you giving it to someone where you have no control over how that money is being spent, that's a statement you're making to God that He is in control of all of you. So if you take even 2% of the 10% and you are deciding, I'm going to give that to this charitable organization because I think they're doing really great things, do you see how you are in control of that? You are saying, this is how that money is going to be spent because I think that's a really good thing to do. Now, I have no problem if you're doing that beyond your tithe, but if you're using some of your tithe money to do that, I'm saying you're not letting God be in full control of that. You're just not. You are deciding where that money is going, and I don't think that captures the spirit of the instruction of tithe. Now, again, I want to emphasize so many times, there's incredible organizations. Like I was just talking to somebody before service talking about this organization that is making potable water for people who don't have like a well in their town. That's an unbelievable charitable organization for people to like drink water. Like, are you kidding me? That's incredible that we could send resource to go do that. But again, I want to say that from my Bible study, I don't think that's tithe. That's offerings, and I strongly encourage you to do that. Be generous. Like, just as a general rule, if you wanted to get spiritual advice from me, like in general, if you're a human being, be generous. Like that, you will experience a phenomenal life if you err on the side of generosity because of just how God is, in my opinion. But our tithe money is not in our control, and God has already set up an arrangement. He already has set up the arrangement in the scriptures to tell us what to do with that tithe money so that it's not in our control. Remember when I said that this might touch on deeper issues like control? And if that's like, but it's a really good organization. Like, well, these are the scriptures. We want the scriptures to inform our thinking. All right, Numbers now. I'm going to show you Numbers 18, verse 20. I put it up on the screen here for your edification. Then the Lord said to Aaron, now remember Aaron was in charge of the priests, you shall have no inheritance in their land. Savage. Nor own any portion among them. Let's keep reading though. I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons of Israel. And to the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel for an inheritance in return for the service which they perform, meaning the priests, the service of the tent of meeting. And the sons of Israel shall not come near the tent of meeting again, lest they bear sin and die. I'm going to explain that. Jump down to verse 31. Now he's talking to the priests. He's saying this tithe that all Israel gathers and then gives to the tabernacle, you may eat it anywhere, you and your households, for it is your compensation in return for your service in the tent of meeting. So he's already set up this arrangement where, again, when Israel came into Canaan, and God said, okay, tribe of Dan, you get this land. Okay, tribe of Benjamin, you get this land. Okay, sons of Levi, you get nothing. It's kind of brutal, right? And think about it, like the land back in those days, because their main source of income was cattle or, livestock and being able to farm stuff. There was nobody who worked in, tender like we do these days. There was you couldn't make money unless you worked the land some way, somehow. And so to the Levites, they got nothing. They are entirely, 100%, completely beholden to this system, this arrangement that God had made, that the tithe money from the rest of the people who got inheritance in the land, that God would take that tithe money and he would use it to be the compensation or the income for the priests in exchange for them lazing about and doing nothing? No. They didn't work the land, but their job was to minister to God. That was a big thing. And also to minister to the people in that nation. That's why I so strongly believe that tithe is meant to go to your local home church, because there very likely are ministers in that home church that are relying upon that money as their compensation to be able to perform the things that we all enjoy. And if you think about it this way, It's one thing to think about it from an individual's perspective, like, yeah, what's the big deal if I take 8% and I give it to my local church, and I take 2% and I give it to someone making wells in Africa? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal, friends, is that if everybody was doing that, then our income, just quite frankly, would be down quite a bit. And if you talk to any council member, you will find that one of the biggest arguments that I have to have with them, argument sounds really harsh, one of the biggest discussions that I get to have with them, honestly, is how little we pay people around here. And when a lot of those council members, especially first-time council members, they come and they look at that number, they're offended on behalf of the staff members here at the church. They do not get paid a lot. And so I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I'm trying to explain this is a system that God has set up. And I want to try to appeal to your this is so an expression of the goodness of God, okay? So think about it from this perspective. God says, I do want you to tithe. It did become a part of the law. It did start in Abram as a voluntary thing that he did, but it became a part of the law. God said, I want you to tithe. When we tithe, what we're doing is we're saying, God, use this any way that you want. You can use it for anything. It's not mine. It's completely under your control. Do whatever you want with it. And do you know what God did with that? He takes that tithe and he says, I'm going to set up a system that is meant to do you good, the person who just tithed to God. Do you understand that? Like, you gave something to God, and he takes that and immediately turns it into something that blesses you back. Do you get that? That is the goodness of God. So he takes this tithe from us, and then he gives it to people whose job it is to dedicate themselves to setting up ministry and to minister to all of us. That is just, God didn't have to do that. I'm not trying to make fun or anything, but God could have taken those tithe monies and given it to a totally separate group of people than the group that it came from. But what I see is that God decided to put it into this system where people could be taken care of. That's why I think the decision for where is your home church is really important, because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you're literally going to put your money where your mouth is. And you're saying, yes, I believe in the mission of this church. I believe in the people of this church. I believe they're doing the Lord's work. And I'm going to contribute towards that, knowing that some of my tithe money is going to be compensating a person who is dedicating themselves wholly to the work of the Lord. Okay. Now, lest we prop up staff members and priests and pastors too much, I want to read to you verse number 26 of the same chapter. I think we have it on the screen here. Yeah, there we go. Moreover, you shall speak to the Levites and say, okay, when you take from the sons of Israel the tithe which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall present an offering from it to the Lord, a tithe of tithe. So if you're on staff here at the church, if you're a pastor here at the church and you receive a wage, we expect you to tithe on that just like it were income from any other source. So anyone who receives money from the church as compensation for work that they do, we also expect that they're tithing from that, a tithe of a tithe. And interestingly, did you know that our church as a church also does this? So of all of the tithe money that we receive from you, we take 10% of that tithe, a tithe of a tithe, a tenth of a tenth, and we take that and we give that to our denomination, Foursquare, and we say, this isn't ours, this is yours, you do with it what you want. Interestingly, Foursquare as a denomination has decided that they really believe in the local church, the power of the local church to decide how best to use money in many cases. And so they've decided to give back a large percentage of the tithe that we give to them, to give it back to us in order to do things that further the mission of the church. So a lot of transfers of funds going on here. But whether they did that or not, we would continue tithing. Because as a church, I want to reiterate to all of you, to me, that this is a spiritual principle, and we transparently, we with full of integrity, want to all be doing the same thing because of how much we believe that God blesses this system that he has set up. I believe that Foursquare is doing everything they know how to do to bless and serve all of the Foursquare churches that are under their care, and there's a lot of them. Similarly, I hope that you can entrust us as staff, as leaders in the church, that we're doing everything we know how to do to serve your needs. Now, please don't take this and get all judgy McJudgerson on like, well, is this church really satisfying my needs? No church is perfect, okay? No church is perfect. But I'm just talking about, generally speaking, are you going to a place that is serving your needs? Okay. One of the last things that I'll comment on is, if you recall back in that verse in Leviticus, Deuteronomy chapter 14, there is some creativity that I can find in the scriptures about how tithe was meant to be given. And honestly, I don't understand it all. It's a little bit of a labyrinth of like trying to understand when things happen and all this kind of thing. But in that verse, it references that for 3 years, you're going to store up all of the produce that you get, and then at the end of 3 years, you give that tithe to the Levites in your town as the tithe that you were giving. So it's kind of interesting, because more my pattern is every time I get a paycheck, I tithe out of that paycheck. But in that case, I think maybe because of the industry that they're in, the agricultural industry, it made more sense to put it in a big old storehouse for 3 years, and then at the end of 3 years to give a big lump sum. Now, generally speaking, I don't recommend that to you. I do recommend that you tithe consistently through your paycheck, but there are some who I've talked to who said, Evan, I was in a really, really bad financial situation, and I had to make a decision about whether I was going to live in my house or to tithe. That's how tight it was. And this is where I strongly recommend that you talk to a spiritual leader in your life, so you don't just get like slapped with a principle, and then again you're just barreled out on the floor. But in some cases, the Lord might say to you, I know, and I want you to tithe anyway. In other cases, I think it would be perfectly fine for you to kind of keep a mental tally, or even like write it down to say, this is the income that I got for these many months, and I can't pay tithe, and as soon as I can, I'm going to pay all of that back, so that I'm not cheating God out of anything, but I'm just going to keep track of it, and then I'm going to pay that all in one lump sum. That could be a way where if you're in a really tight spot, and you felt like the Holy Spirit was leading you in that sort of freedom, that you could exercise that kind of creativity, so that everything is accounted for, but there's just a little bit of a time delay between when you are paid some money and then when you tithe. And I just think that we can have that sort of understanding and compassion. Has anybody here been in a really bad financial situation ever? So I think that we can really have compassion on one another and go to the heart of the matter, which is we believe that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. But we can be creative and open for the ways that this can happen. But the emphasis there is, what is God saying to you? How is God leading you? And I don't think that he's going to say, I'll just forget about the tithe. There was one year where Lindsay and I, through no fault of anybody else, we just made an honest clerical error, basically. And what we do as a church is we give you a statement at the end of the year saying, hey, here's all the tithe that you've given to the church. You can use this document for tax purposes. It's great. I looked at that total number amount there, and I thought, I know how much money I've made this year, and that is not 10% of that number. And so Lindsay and I began looking into it, and sure enough, there was not a small amount of money that we had not paid in tithe on accident. It was a total accident. And we discussed it, and we decided, no, we want to pay all of this to the Lord. We got our checkbook out, and we wrote a large amounts of money in December, or whatever month it was, to catch up, so to speak, for the honest mistake that we had made. I don't think that God was like, I did not bless your June because you didn't tithe on that June money, and it's so tight, and that's why your back hurt even worse. To try to tell you, you should have been tithing. No, come on. We didn't even know it. But once we became aware of it, we wanted to make sure that we were right before the Lord, because it's not our money. It's not ours. It might be in our bank account, but that's the Lord's. So we paid all that back. And that's kind of, just a bit of a principle, I think, of what I might encourage you to do. Okay. And we did that to the best of our ability. I mean, there were some things that we just weren't sure about, so we just did it to the best of our ability. I even thought about once I started tithing on pre-tax instead of post-tax, should I go back to all of the wages that I've earned in my life and pay back all of that tithe? But I believe before the Lord that process in and of itself would have been very complicated and onerous, and I didn't really feel like the Lord was saying yeah, I want you to do that, because he's not putting us over a gun barrel and saying, make sure it's right. He's trying to position us for blessing and teach us what it's like to be kids, and he's dad. That's what's happening here. Okay, I'm going to touch on 2 New Testament scriptures. We're going to throw it up here really quick. I probably shouldn't say that. We're not going to throw it up. We're going to place it on the screen up there. So some people you might hear oh, well, come on. We don't do all the things in the Old Testament law, so why would we do this archaic, ancient principle of tithing, because that's just something that's in the law? First of all, no, it's not just in the law. Abram and Jacob came before the law, so score number 1 for us. Score number 2 for us is people don't often remember the scripture where Jesus implies that tithing is something that we ought not to abandon, despite the fact that he came to fulfill the law. And here's what it says. I'm gonna read it from you. What are you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites? For you tithe, there's that word, mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. So he wasn't saying forget that tithing of mint thing that you're doing, and I want you to focus on justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He was saying, I want you to be operating in justice, mercy, and faithfulness while also not neglecting the spiritual principle of tithing. So it's kind of a little hidden gem in there, but that is Jesus himself talking, saying, guys, don't neglect this practice of tithing. So this is not an ancient, archaic, what's up with that ancient law stuff anyway kind of thing. This is something we get to do today. Lastly, there's a verse in Matthew 22 where somebody was trying to trick Jesus and talk about taxes. Even back then, taxes was a hot topic. And Jesus settled it for all of us, and I would warn all of us to have this kind of attitude. Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto the Lord what is the Lord's. And so, we are encouraged in scriptures to follow the law of the land and to do so quietly, frankly. And so that's the law of the land, so we want to render unto the government what we owe in taxes. But we don't want to do that, certainly at the expense of forgetting what is the Lord's. And so while I don't think this is an explicit reference to tithing, and I've met a lot of just prickly people who are like, that's not about tithing. It doesn't say tithing anywhere in there. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. The subject that he's talking about is money, and he's talking about giving to God what is God's. And what we learn from Leviticus and other scriptures is that tithe belongs to God, and what is tithe? Tithe is money. It's not this massive conceptual leap where people are like, no, it's not about tithing. I agree, it's about taxes, but also, folks, it's about something much deeper, isn't it? It's about falling in line with a plan that's not yours. And it's uncomfortable to do so, whether it's the laws of the land or whether it's the instruction of the Lord. That's the thing that he was doing. But I think that tithe is certainly one of those topics that Jesus high-fived on the way to going to that deeper subject matter. So I find that argument so ridiculous and probably biased that you just really don't want to have it be touched on tithing. Probably. Since we're making judgy statements, why don't I just shoot one right back at you? All right. So now I want to invite David Perkle and Lynn Starr to come on up here. They're going to give us a couple of testimonies of something they experienced from the Lord when they gave back to him. So, David, would you start and share your story?
Sure.
I can move mine. Here you go.
So my story, probably half of you have heard it already. My testimony is not directly about tithing, but is more that God showed me before I was fully engaged in tithing that I could depend on him and that he was my provider. I Googled some verses about God as your provider, and I got listings of 71 verses that God is your provider, 100 verses that God is your provider, top 15 verses that God is your provider. And so I didn't bother to actually pick out any one verse.
It's in there.
It's in there. God is your provider, and you can trust him for that. And that's basically what my testimony is. One verse I do have is Psalms 50:10, is that for every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. But the accuser challenges me on that and asks, is that really true? Where are all these cattle that has God's brand on it? And where is this bank account that God has that he can provide all this stuff for you? And I found this out during a period of my life when I was unemployed. And God first demonstrated to me that he could provide for me through the people of his church. And we were living on our savings, and we're watching our savings dwindle down lower and lower. And we were attending church and sharing with people that things were tough and we were looking for a job. And one day I got a knock on the door, and this gentleman says, "Hi, I'm one of the deacons of the church. We heard you guys are having financial difficulties, and we just want to help you out." And he stuck this thing in my hand, and it was a wad of bills of about $200. And it was enough money to help us continue for another couple of weeks in job search and so forth. And but things didn't work out at that time. But so my wife and I were looking at our budget and our resources, and we were thinking, it's about time to call up the mortgage company and start negotiating, because I don't think we're going to make our next mortgage payment. And we had one more credit card bill that was going to come in, and we figured that would be the end of our resources, and then we would be totally dependent on the Lord. So our credit card bill came in, and we had a MasterCard, and there was a credit of $500 for a Visa card. So this was clearly a mistake. We don't have a Visa card. We don't have a Visa card, so why are we getting a $500 credit on a Visa card on our bill? So I wanted to be a man of integrity, and I call up the credit card company and I say, there's been a mistake, we've got a $500 credit, and we should correct this. And they said, oh, that is so great, you guys letting us know about that. There's nothing we can do about that unless the person who gave you the credit asks for it back. And I said, well, who gave the credit? And they said, oh, it was some lady, blah, 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 blah. So I called up the lady, and I say, we got your credit. You were supposed to get a credit of $500 on your Visa card, but it ended up on our card. And she said, no, I got the credit. It's right there. Everything's fine. It's like, well, that's weird. So I call up the credit card company again and say, the person got the credit, so what's going on? And they said, I don't know, the company that paid them the credit, And so I call up the company, I say, you must have paid 2 credits, because the lady got the credit and I got the credit. And they said, no, our books are all great. No problem, everything balances out. And then the light bulb went off. Okay, thank you, God. You have the cattle on 1,000 hills. And so I want to come against the accuser who would ask you, oh, if you tithe, is God able to provide for that so that you your needs can be met? And certainly he can. And some of the verses that, we're out of time? Okay. Well, anyway.
I think your last point.
My last point is in Exodus. It really strikes me. In Exodus, God makes a point of, you were traveling around in the desert for 40 years. Your clothes didn't wear out. Your sandals didn't wear out. I was taking care of you.
Thank you, David. Lynn, tell us your story.
Oh, gee. Well, you will be out of time if I do.
Okay. Tell us your Reader's Digest story.
I got an abridged version here. Do I have
You're going to have to. Otherwise, they can't hear you.
Hi. Hi. When the subject of tithing came up in a meeting a week ago, I get so fired up about tithing because tithing changed my life. For it was about 25 years ago that I kept hearing about tithing. And that's easy to do when you trust in the Lord, right? And when you're not a single mom with 3 kids trying to figure out how to buy next week's groceries. That gets a little hard. So it just kept being impressed upon me to trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Take the control out of my hands, Lord, and let me be obedient in one thing, tithing. I'm shaking like a leaf. Anyway, I want you just to understand how much it changed my life by being obedient to one thing, because I was a control freak. As a single mom with 3 kids, I made my own way. I got a boyfriend to move into the house. He brought his daughter. Too much information, I know, you guys, but I made my own way. And the Lord couldn't bless me. He couldn't cover me. I mean, things were a mess. And just by the grace of God, I raised 3 amazing kids with his help. And I have an amazing husband who you all know. But it's because of that one thing to be obedient to, for me to obedient to, trust him, tithe. And once I did that, I was able to hear people speak into my life about things that weren't good. I could hear them because of trusting the Lord. So whatever it is in your life, for me it was trusting him with everything, with my money, with supplying for my children. And the other thing that really struck me is Ecclesiastics 11:5. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. We can't understand it. How's it work? For me to give $60 a week, that was a lot of groceries and things for my kids. But once I trusted him, then I could understand. Then I could see the work of the Lord in my life. Then I could see the path that he had me on. I don't always see it. I still kind of mess up, but anyway, just if you can trust him with the little things like your finances, you can trust him with your children, with everything else.
Thank you, Lynn. So I'm going to invite Dave Mann and Jesse Englehart to come on up here, and they're going to share some of their stories, some of their experiences with tithing or otherwise financially giving towards the Lord. And Dave, I'm going to ask you to start. Would you bless us with some stories?
Thank you. These are my wife's glasses. I can't see you, but I can read. Okay, before tithing, Malachi 3:8-10. He didn't give you that number last week. He taught on Malachi 3:8-10. It's the last book in the New Testament, just before Matthew, and I think we all know where Matthew is, and it's right there. And after he taught that, I was just riveted. I thought, what? That was a really one that kind of zinged to me, a real zinger. Came up and talked to him about it. That's exactly, I can relate to that, because Carol and I totally tithe, and I've always tithed. Before we knew the Lord, came back to the Lord, We were both with modest families. We never had really more than enough to make ends meet. Then enter Pamela Brown and Daniel Brown, pregnant with you, by the way. When they walked into my real estate office, how old are you now?
34.
34 years ago, and led us to the Lord. And I ended up selling them their home, and they still live there, and we're still here at the church. Immediately, I became an usher, and I collected the money, and I counted the money, so I saw what was coming in. And immediately, we're on the church council. So we saw where the money was going, and immediately, and it was hard for me to be serious ever, but I was really serious, went to your dad and said, we're not going to make it, dude. I mean, this is the money coming in, and that's it. We're going to do something to make money somehow here, like bingo night or something, something. And he says, oh, man of little faith. And he taught me all about God's economy, which is different than our economy. And so Carol and I immediately started tithing. We didn't have extra money, but we made it happen. And then we had extra money, and we always have had extra money as a result of that. These are the things that happened immediately after we started tithing. I'm a realtor. She had a real job because we only had money from me when I sold a house, and she was really paranoid that I wouldn't sell a house and we were going to die. But it all worked out. And immediately afterwards, I worked still in the same office. I've been there for 40 years. Thank you very much, right across the way. The people that owned the company come to me and said, and oh, by the way, it was the number one company in the county. Dave, we're going to retire. And you have two options. Option number one is we're going to close the building down, and you can go to any other office you want to go to. Or number two, you'll take over the company. And I thought, geez, let me think about it. I really didn't want to do that because I was really busy. Went home, we talked about it. Daniel Brown, Gene Scotthorn, Steve Blackwell at the forum at Cabrillo prayed. I had a great scripture that said, buy the company, and I did. And I never looked back and never regretted it. I hired Blackwell to be the manager. We stole Hattie Heidley from the church to be your assistant. All of our receptionists, all of our secretaries were all people from the coastlands, and we thrived. So then fast forward another minute, and Kip Jackson was my top competitor. He had Coldwell Banker, and we were friends. And he shows up at church. And I thought, so then his dad invited Carol and I, with our boys, and Kip and his family to go on probably the first mission trip to Switzerland. So do the math on that. But we ended up spending a week on a farm in Oslo, Norway. And we thought, Kip and I got to know each other and like each other and thought, why don't we just merge and just end this? Just kind of really cocky talk, We could have so much fun. So we did. After we prayed for it, your dad, two guys back here, hands on. And the Lord really blessed the company as a result of that. We grew the company to over 100 agents, a dozen employees. We opened a third office. Shortly thereafter, just like the Lord hanging rainbows, a woman knocks on our door and says, I'm retiring, semi-retiring from over the hill. I'm a realtor. I've been a realtor all my life. I have a beach house. I want to go to work here. I said, hallelujah. How would you like to be the manager of our Santa Cruz office? And she did. I said, who sent you here? She said, the Lord. I swear to you as I'm standing here. I thought, pah. I interviewed a guy for a job to be a realtor at my office who goes to this church, used to, and he's was arrogant-ish. And I know I get arrogant, as we all do. And he thought, I'm talking to two different people. I've talked to my friends, and they said that you and Kip, kind of like the God Squad. Is that true? Do you pray at your office meetings? I go, no, but we definitely pray before the office meetings. I was just up front. And so I knew for a fact that the word on the street was that. Then, fast forward, and the Lord says, you need to slow down, cowboy. I don't know if he used the word cowboy. But I was having too much fun and working too hard. And so I actually had your dad and some guys pray about that. And Kip and I decided when we turned 55 years old, sell the company, and we did. So now I can really put to test over the last 15 years, yes, I'm 70, that seek ye first the kingdom and the Lord will take care of things. And he has for 15 years. We don't feel any different. I'm making tons less money, but we still tithe on that. I tithe on my Social Security. I tithe on their gross. I tithe on... So...
Good afternoon, everybody. I can gladly testify to the promise and the blessing that is tithing. Josh and I have been tithing faithfully we'll be married 20 years in May. And it's something that we really have built our life upon. And I don't say that to boast or to puff us up in any way. One of the things that I discovered quickly as I kind of stepped into, I grew up in this church since I was really my youngest son's age. I've been going to this church since I was little. And as I stepped into different places of leadership, one of the things that I quickly discovered is that all of these people that I had looked up to and looked at and watched growing up, that turns out they are all just like me. And everybody, we are not perfect. So I don't say that in any kind of way that look at us, we're doing it right, but I say it specifically because we have 20 years of walking in this way, and I can promise you the fruit of it. I wouldn't do it any differently. And there were years, really when we started, I didn't even get it. I was asking somebody, so like, what do you do when you don't have it? Like, we don't have it. And they were like, back then, you literally wrote checks. They're like, it's literally the first check you write. So it's like, oh, okay. So we started doing that. It was the first check that we wrote. And there were many years where our budget did not work. I promise you. Like, the math did not compute. It shouldn't have worked. And it did. And not to say that there were years that were hard, there were years that were very lean and very tight, but not all of them. And there are a lot of things in our lives that are true that I know are because of that. We have gotten, the blessing that has come, that we have gotten to do, that we have gotten to experience, and it's not just about stuff or trips or vacations, though there are many ways that the Lord has blessed us in those things, places we should not have been able to go, places we should not have been able to see, things that we should not have been able to do. But it's not just about that. It is also about just the floodgates that open of the Lord bringing his blessing in breakthrough, in freedom, in movement, in things that I don't believe would have happened were we not faithful to that. I'm just checking to see if there was anything else that I wanted to say. I don't think that I have to. I think that's it.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Lynn, so much. It's an extraordinary claim that Lynn just said. This one thing changed my life. And, as a general rule, some of the biggest sticking points in our lives end up becoming the biggest things that God just uses to radically transform us. I don't say that to be cavalier. The subject of finances, your financial security, fear about the future is a real thing, and it should be treated with sensitivity. But that sensitivity should not turn into something where we sort of excuse ourselves. We step outside of the Lord's boundaries. If anything, that fear, that nervousness should drive us to say, God, where is your boundary? And I want to go there because I can eat of the tasty field that you put in front of me. As the deer panteth for the water, so the Lord brings my soul to quiet places where I can be provided for.